once again, thank you for being here. This is a very, I think, important and could be a controversial topic. My name is Romeo, and I have a background in defense as an intelligence analyst and also as a management consultant doing transformation, cybersecurity, and user design. So believe it or not, a cybersecurity guy is also trained as a design thinker professional. So in 2024, there's going to be around 79 countries will be holding political elections, with social media platforms being the main communication channel to target voters, right? How can AI help in detecting and preventing misinformation so that voters get the information they want? In this panel, we have really two topics that we would like to hammer as a message, and that is what are these esteemed organizations doing to ensure that election integrity is kept, and sort of along those lines dispelling the myth of AI, right? And then the second question is really more important, and it really requires a participatory, collaborative environment, not just for these companies and these organizations, but for whole of society to really think about what our role is in fighting this disinformation that is tearing apart the very fabric of our democracy, right? And that question is, what is missing to make this a more concerted effort? So with that, I will give the panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves and then provide a viewpoint on the subject.
So my name is Philippe Cohen, and I'm a lawyer by design, and I've founded and created 10 years ago an NGO named Respect Zone out from France, which is based in France, in Belgium, and in the US. And we endeavor to fight cyber violences, to protect any generation, any people on Earth, including how to preserve democracy against cyber violence. So 10 years after, Respect Zone has been founded. Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon. Stéphane Bugam, the Chief Executive Officer of the Cyber Peace Institute. We are a non-for-profit based in Geneva, and we provide for free cybersecurity solutions to the most vulnerable, mostly other NGOs. We also track and trace independently cyber attacks, like what happened in the middle of COVID or the invasion in 2022 of Ukraine, what's happening now in the Middle East, or specific deployment of spyware and the like. And we try to make sure that policy making makes use of this data in order to have policies one day that would be a bit efficient to protect the most vulnerable. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Eric Carwin. I'm the CTO of Pira Technologies. I co-founded Pira with our COO, Beck Jones, who's over here with me today, and Welton Chang, who couldn't attend, our CEO. We founded the company with the explicit mission to monitor alternative, unmoderated social spaces that are typically just ignored altogether by security, by nonprofits, and by industry when thinking about security online. And basically what we do is kind of threefold. We monitor these kind of alternative, fringe, unmoderated spaces that exist between the dark web and mainstream social media, really where people are radicalized, where narratives are tested and fine-tuned for greater effect. And we identify threats and misinformation, and we have an analyst team that does a great job of teasing those out. So excited to have this conversation. I think it's, as you said, Romeo, I think it's a really prudent one for the times.
And I'm Jan Eisfeld, the global head of a little NGO called the Wikimedia Foundation, which is a charity that operates Wikipedia and a bunch of other web assets that aim to provide educational collaborative spaces to the public. For the Europeans in the room, we are also the only NGO on the planet that has been classified as a VLOP under the Digital Services Act, so a very large online platform, due to the reach that we have globally. Last point, we have content communities, right, who are self-organizing volunteers in 383 currently languages. So also higher diversity of languages than any other large platform on the planet.
So let's start from the far left. So what is Wikimedia doing to ensure election integrity? And please include some of the things you're doing to dispel some of the myths about AI, elections, and trust.
That's a good question. So a good way to start is to just talk about the business model, right? So if you think about online communities that are working for a purpose in a self-organized manner, Wikipedia is probably the most prominent example, and the relationship to their platform provider, in our case, the Wikimedia Foundation, think about the relationship between the frame and the painting within. If you've ever met a hobby artist, painters or otherwise, they have a really strong sense of what they are doing and why. And the same is true for people who curate knowledge for the benefit of humankind on our platforms. So the first layer of response that protects this content that the public relies on is actually in those communities themselves who have spent the last 23 years creating and curating that. Because like any other hobbyist, they're really keen on making sure no one messes with the paint of the art that they have created. And they take a wide range of approaches to this. Of course, on the one hand, they really like only very well verified knowledge, specifically to topics that matter, what our communities call in their self-created policies notability. Then, unlike, for example, social media companies, given that there are so few Wikipedians, there are roughly 120,000 regular contributors across all of those Wikipedia language versions globally. One of the key things they do every time there's a large election is they lock those articles down, right? Everybody can edit every Wikipedia page on the planet, and it's fully transparent. But if they feel it comes to a point where their self-regulatory mechanisms hit, due to the fast-moving news environment, for example, a certain threshold, they slow down the contribution rate, which no for-profit platform would ever do because they live off engagement, obviously. So that's all happening within the painting. Now the Wikimedia Foundation essentially provides a technical as well as a policy frame beyond, where the communities feel there's complementary value to be added, bringing our professional teams in, we partner with them effectively. That can be quite often they're interested actually in partnering with a civil society organization in a language that they might not be speaking, right? Our projects are organized by language, have nothing to do with geography. Every Wikipedia article in English language Wikipedia is the same article with the same content in the same words anywhere on the planet. But let's say the topic is about something that happens in Malayalam, is South Dravidian language. Building that institutional relationship, that's what they use us for. And the same is true, to go to your last point, about artificial intelligence. We are also the world's largest NGO cloud provider alongside hosting Wikipedia. So if you're a citizen who is interested in building machine learning models for the public good, you can just do so and upload them and run them on our cloud, where every user can also see and audit and test and interact with the same models, which you then can deploy as a member of our community in that community and have a peer control system. Think about if you would be a Facebook user, and every Facebook user on the planet could basically see what all those artificial intelligence models are doing and influence that directly without having to go through a corporate guardian. That's essentially how this works. So we have a human-centric approach to these issues, where we empower individuals and the communities of which they are part in a self-organized manner to do what they are setting out to do within the charitable frame, with an educational purpose that we provide. And so far, 23 years in, it works pretty well.
Every time you have a conversation about misinformation, disinformation, inevitably the conversation steers toward Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and how they're performing at preventing that stuff from happening, which isn't they're not performing very well. What is typically overlooked is the fact that a lot of that misinformation, in fact, most of the misinformation or disinformation that shows up on those platforms doesn't start there. It starts in Telegram channels, it starts on 4chan, it starts on Getter or Gab or any of these American alternative platforms that Americans seem to think we need to share our special voices. But it doesn't start on those platforms, and by the time it gets there, it's already made an impact. It's already convinced too many people. It's already influenced too many people's thinking on important issues. And so our focus is purely on the places where those narratives start, the places that are not quite the dark web, they're not mainstream social media, but they're where unmoderated spaces where I can say things like certain ethnicities run the world, or certain ethnicities created COVID to undermine American world supremacy, or whatever craziness I want to pitch. I'm able to do that in a space where no one's going to stop me, no one's going to censor me, and I can test how well that resonates. I can create a following, and then that following can go out to Twitter, that following can go out to Instagram, TikTok, etc., and really exponentially spread my message once I know what I want that message to be. And so at Pira, we focus on 40-plus alternative, unmoderated social media sites, along with thousands of forums, and we apply AI intelligently. And when you talk about the myths of AI, I think there's kind of two camps that we generally see people fall in. You see a lot of people fall on, you could say, far left or one side, right, where they think AI can't do anything. They're just kind of completely unaware. They think ChatGPT is a phase. The other side, where people think that ChatGPT can do everything and that AI can solve every problem. And the reality is we're somewhere in the middle. And so the approach that we take at Pira to apply AI intelligently without falling into either of those holes is to use it to illuminate things that decision makers need to see in order to understand the threats that are in front of them. So we leverage AI algorithms to identify misinformation and disinformation in near real time across all of these platforms. We identify hate speech and violent speech. We identify these narratives as they show up, and then we allow our clients or decision makers to actually read them, interpret the context, and make the ultimate decision. So it's leveraging AI where it's appropriate and leveraging it to amplify the capabilities of a human without expecting it to do the full job that a human would do.
Maybe it's interesting to go back to the election context and to provide some thoughts in this space. A lot of what I'm going to share is also coming from my more than 25 years in law enforcement, mostly in Europol, when I was looking into propaganda of Daesh and Al-Qaeda when it comes to radicalization process, which is not so different the way it's happening with exactly what you're mentioning. Core disseminators that creates content somewhere, and then the content moves to mainstream platform, but it's already too late. So some thoughts to be shared there. Election. So in order to run an election, you need an election infrastructure, and you need people to vote, more or less. I'm simplifying, but I think it's enough for this for the address. I would argue that the AI potential risk needs to be looked into both. So the risk to the safety of the infrastructure, so AI as an accelerator or not of cyber attacks on the pipes of the elections. And the other one is how AI can or cannot accelerate the cognition, influence when it comes to the information space in which voters are active. On the second, it's kind of easy because we've seen manipulation of election, or at least disinformation, big discourse, to manipulate election process for almost 20 years now, and using mainstream, indeed, social media. And to your point, that's very important. I would like to underline because it's critical, with content that is creating somewhere else and then moved there. You would argue that AI is just going to augment this process because it's easier to produce content with AI, but so be it. It's not going to modify it to the root of what it is. So the problem is still the same. We're still having the same problem of core disseminators, then getting this content into mainstream platform, having mainstream media outside of social media, sometimes TV, radio, using the same content, disseminating, scaling, virality. AI is just going to make this at speed and at scale. So sadly enough, if we haven't found a solution for this before, I don't know how we're going to find a solution for this now. Because we haven't changed the infra. On the other parts, which is more the convergence in between disinformation and cyber attacks, it's hard. There can be specific targeting on the election infrastructure. And that's more complicated because to date, the ecosystem which runs election, the technical ecosystem, is very dispersed. The cyber security maturity level of this ecosystem is very shaky, to say the least. And there's not been, to my knowledge, a real assessment that is globally. You're mentioning 80 actors that are going to go through election. You will not find like this forum of the 80 sharing best practices in cybersecurity, readiness for the election system. And that's an issue in itself. And where AI poses a problem is that how AI today is leveraged to accelerate cyber attacks. it's still also shaky because today you need to train big model on AI, you need a lot of data. Cyber criminals, sometimes they don't have all this data. You need a lot of processing power. They don't have access to the same processing power of big companies, for example. And you need talent. I mean, if no one can find data scientists now, it's complicated for criminals to hire them also. But state actors, with the interest of manipulating election or to do foreign interference, they have access to this capacity. And that's an uncharted, territory for risk. And I will pause on this.
I really like what you all said, especially about these questions about AI. My angle is going to be for Respect Zone more. What can we do to secure the fact that election can still be a democratic tool in the context of cyber violence, which are growing? Senegal has been the most recent big election this last week. It was delayed, remember, because of violence. Violence was not only presential, physical violence. It was, generated also with cyber violence. There was also another issue which we haven't tackled yet, which is the access to online bandwidth during election. Because if having cyber violence is an issue, having deepfake is an issue, having misuse of AI is an issue, but not having access to online data is another type of issue. And I want also to mention the fact that this week, since 8th of March, which is an International Day for Protection of Women and Right for Women, which are missing in this panel, by the way, I must mention, we have set up a charter, Respect Zone, which is called Online Respect for Her. It's to address something which has not really been addressed big times, which is how to protect ladies, women, girls online with a specific focus on online violence, which is first and foremost targeting women online. During elections, manipulation of votes of women and violenting the vote of women has always been a big issue in many, many, many countries, because the vote of women is used or misused to be a way to put in power candidates who are not necessarily in favor of women. And this is something which is coming back again. So in this part of the world, we have two big elections coming, the one at the EU level, the one in the US. And it's not because we are not in a developed country that the elections is not going to be a forum for violence. Remember what happened at the Capitol? In the EU, there are many, many countries which are being under populist governments, and we are really here to try to promote, which is something which has been inspired by Wikimedia, by the way, and self-moderation. And I like the fact that it is transparent in a fashion which is quite unusual these days, including in spite of the DSA and the DMA. What we are trying to propel, and this is more of a project than something which is happening now, but we have been able in France to secure, as part of a start of a law, which is being debated at this very moment at the French Parliament in what is called Commission Mixte Paritaire, which is an inter-house commission, which is going to try to kill some of the developments of what has been the implementation of the DSA in the French law with Barreau law, which is currently being buried by the French CMP. One of the articles that we have been able to insufflate in this text for the next hours, maybe, is a project which has been selected by the by the International Peace Forum that is gathering every year in France, and which has been propelling the existence of this child online safety lab, which has been put in place to propose something which should be and could be applicable to election, election context of cyber violence, which is a mediation platform. I.e., the idea is that when magistrate, when courts, when flagging or reporting a content to the platforms that you mentioned doesn't work, or it takes too much time to be implemented, or is too costly, we have come with the Child Online Safety Lab with this proposal, which could be applicable to the improvement of the safety and democratic safety of election, which is a mediation platform, independently run, not very far from what Wikipedia is doing, not very far from what Twitter has tried to copy with Twitter Notes, where there is some arbitration and moderation of content which can be escalated with a community, as the ones that you can see in some video game, online gaming. And this project, which I urge you to take a look at on our website, respectzone.org, is called Respect Mediation. And we believe that alternative dispute resolution can also serve to guarantee a better level of democracy in election when it's about fighting cyber violence, which is so paramount, especially in a time of deep fakes, in a time where you can kill a candidate in 2 posts, basically.
As you could see, there is a lot of the ecosystem is here, and there's a lot more ecosystem players. There could be some fragmentation, there could be some partnerships, there could be some collaboration. There are rabbit holes we can go down to drive this subject depending on the capabilities of the organizations that we have here represented. And it really talks to a compute power, an AI that could be used for generative adversarial networks, GANs, and an infrastructure problem, right? But I think now that we really run after time, there is a what do we do, right? Because we are all up here on stage, and there's others out there that's doing this work in this area of elections. What is missing so that we become a more concerted effort? 2 minutes each. It would be great to hear. Would you like to start?
Just to complete the set of proposals, we are willing, so we have set up a Respect Zone Charter, one for disabled persons online, and since last week, we are urging you to sign the Respect Zone for Her women-oriented one, which will be presented even more deeply tomorrow here by Isabelle Rome to conclude this forum, former French minister. The proposal of Respect Zone would be to try to work on 2 aspects of how to protect candidates, journalists, and voters by propelling and generating self-moderation charter to be signed by candidates and voters to guarantee the democratical process. I guarantee that I will be respecting the rule of law when I participate in an election as a candidate, as a commentator, or as a voter. That's something which is pro-democracy, not against democracy, and pro-freedom of speech. And that's a very concrete proposal for this panel today.
Sorry. So, yeah, less than 2 minutes, then very practical. One of the group that we're looking into, which is doing foreign interference campaign, targeting, it's global targeting, but let's say lately is retargeting the EU, at least 7 EU countries on heavy campaign now. We analyzed, so civil society, us, EU Disinfolab, Curium, others, analyzed the infrastructure that this group is using, and at the end of the day, you look at this group is using exactly the same infrastructure as cybercrime. So with the same infra, they do ransomware, malware development, info stealer, and the like. And on top of that, because as everyone else, they are saving costs on infra, on people, they are also putting that disinformation campaign. Low-hanging fruit, you go down the cybersecurity and the cybercrime tackling route in order to take down your disinformation. Because there's tools that works there, which are more complicated to use in the realm of disinformation. You have like, trained model for law enforcement to work together in order to take down this kind of entity. I would argue that the more we think about this now, in between now and the elections, especially the EU election, the less we are going to be ready for the mark. It's already too late. So now we need to do it in low-hanging fruit and how to take down the infrastructure that you use against our own interest.
Pira?
So I think, I think when you think about 79 elections in 2024, the way that elections tend to impact the social tone online is pretty significant. If you look back to 2020, specifically in the United States, you can watch from 2016 to 2020 just the tone in terms of how hateful and violent and aggressive the online communities got. It's pretty apparent if you were studying kind of the trends online. In a lot of ways, the U.S. is an anomaly in that way. I mean, we have like major party representatives that drive a lot of that, so that's anomalous in some ways. But in general, it's a consistent trend with elections worldwide. And so when you think about that, and you think about what actually impacts people online, it's hate speech, it's violent speech, it's threats, it's misinformation and disinformation. So at the core, how we can be more concerted is to just really decide what problems we're trying to solve. Every time you get in this conversation, you hear people talk about bots or deepfakes, which we've talked about today, or synthetic content. And the question I always ask is, does it really matter? Does it matter if a bot posts it, or if it's synthetic, or if it's a deepfake, or does it matter if it's false? If you could see my headshot, which I don't think you can, I think I look really good in it, but it also is a fake. It's a fake picture. It was generated by AI because I didn't want to cut my hair, and my wife said I needed to have short hair for my headshot. And my point is, does it matter that the picture is generated by AI, or does it matter that it isn't a picture of me, right? Or that it doesn't look like me? And so when we think about elections, we think about misinformation, hate speech, et cetera. Does it really matter who posts the content, if it's a real person or a bot, or if the content is synthetic, or does it matter whether it's true or the danger is real?
So if the question is, what does it take to have a concert?
Exactly.
Or an orchestra, right? I think the thing that's missing, it's not unique to this year is just particularly pronounced because we have more elections than usual, are incentives, right? Platforms work for whatever their mission is based on the incentives in the environment that they find themselves in. That works out in a particular way in our context because Wikimedia's incentive structure basically prioritizes accurate information. That's the reason why the platform exists and the communities that partner with it. Other platforms, specifically in the for-profit sector, have very different incentives. So the way they're building their business models, and then that manifests in systems and processes, that then is what citizens or actors of any kind find and work with, is based on their incentive structure. The second layer to this is regulatory fragmentation is one of those disincentives, right? The more sovereigns, for very good reasons often, in terms of their public policy incentives, they too have incentives, create regulatory fragmentation, the harder it gets over time to actually build a concerted effort in the protection of democracy or any other public interest or good for that matter. Now, on a practical level, and I said, I think, the same thing in a panel earlier this morning on terrorism, we know as an industry standard, just because there's a lot of scholarly research out there, that the Brussels effect is real, right? So if it's a consumer-facing kind of industry, and all the things we discussed here on the panel are consumer-facing features, the Brussels effect will kick in, and eventually this is where the industry will end up. The faster we get there, probably the better for most stakeholders in civil society.
Thank you. These are really interesting points to ponder on, but it's really about what I'm seeing here is a melange of sort of psychology, sociology, and technology, right? Because it is blending the human, how we think we are, with what we really are, and then the technology platforms and the sort of the tech that we use in order to push these narratives of who we think we are versus who we really are, and then the effect of trying to push a candidate that would represent me, right? and that's a very dangerous proposition. But we're 5 minutes late. We started 5 minutes late, so I think we're on time. So and I don't see anyone knocking down the doors. So I think if you panelists are open to opening up the floor for questions, perhaps 1 or 2 questions would be great. So shoot.
Hi, thank you so much for this discussion. I have a short comment and a question. The comment is that we are already running after the clock. If we're having this conversation now, we're talking about 2024 elections, and this conversation should have been taken 2022 maybe, with all the industry and politicians, etc., to have any result. So that was first my comment. About the question, it's not new to have digital threats to democracy. It's something you all know you've been working on. We can hear that. But what is new today with AI is that there's a real problem. There's a real problem with trust in technology. And it is from everyone. Everyone is questioning any video, any picture they will see. I mean, people are questioning if a video of a princess telling that she has cancer is something true or not. So in this particular context, how can we build trust in information that comes from the candidate, that comes from the journalist, that is sent from videos on WhatsApp, Telegram, etc., and how can we prevent election denial?
Laetitia, thank you for your question, and thank you for the laws that you brought in France, which is still partly part of us. And used by us, especially with the Observatoire des contenus haineux en ligne and with the specialized body of the prosecutor office as well, that you created a couple of years ago in 2018. On your question, what would be the tools? So I will plead for my. It would be charter, commitment, civic, societal commitment, control. Meaning that if candidates, if processes, because the UN for years has set up observers for elections, but they have never been trained to observe how this does happen online. It's how to observe that there is no truckage, that there is no fraud in the way you put your vote bulletin in the box. But that's very different from what we face now. So to your point about how to secure and guarantee a fair process where what you see is what it is and the rest, it's all about norms. And I like very much the ISO and the AFNOR and the norms that have been put in place, as long as there is some budget to audit, control, and guarantee the compliance of the setup of these standards. The governments by themselves will not be able to find the solution. The civil society by themselves will not have the means to do it, and they may not be always that independent. So it is a mix of normalization, standardization, label, commitments, and I think that companies, we have not mentioned much the role of the companies as being part of the solution for election as well.
Just really quickly, I agree with most of what you said. I think that the onus is on industry to prove the kind of moderation that we need to build trust in information is possible. Because like we were talking about before we started, mainstream platforms have no incentive, and I think you mentioned it actually in this conversation. There's no incentive there to do any of it. It's not economically beneficial. There's really no reason to do the kind of moderation that they would need to do. And so it's on industry to prove that kind of moderation, that kind of information validation is possible. But in reality, I think it is going to take governments to create consequence for misinformation before we'll actually be able to build the kind of trust and confidence in information that we need. Because until that happens, there will always be personalities who promote election denial because it's easier than accepting they lost. There will always be environments online where it's easier to promote misinformation that's beneficial to you than it is to try to work with the truth. And so until there's actual consequence for that, there will always be, that risk is always going to be there. But I do agree that it's on industry to show government, put the pressure on the government that that kind of stuff is possible.
Quickly, are we too late or not? Yeah.
Yeah,
What can I
go
say?
ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, just, yeah.
Yeah,
The,
no one's kicking down the door.
No, it was about the question, are we
wait,
too late
wait,
for the
wait.
elections?
Wait.
We're also late. We are double late. We are double
All
late.
right.
So, but let's say that we are not. So we will still have some problem to solve. If we don't have the technology that's going to help us to detect a fake, whatever type of fake it is, a digital fake, we have a bigger problem than just disinformation. It means the fundamental of the court of law disappears. Because the word is digitized. If in front of a court you cannot anymore to say that this piece of evidence, e-evidence, is true or false, that's it. So there's bigger problem that we need to tackle. So that's one investment to do. The second part is, as long as false or truth are part of a market, and depending on if you choose false or truth, someone is going to get money, then there's a problem. Because that's not supposed to be something that is a marketplace. So that's the second thing. If we continue with this system, there's no way out of it. And the third thing would be, maybe we need to change all the school program now and to teach one skill only, which is digital media literacy. Everything else is useless. Everything else is going to tell you by ChatGPT anyhow. So what you need to know to do is to engage with these tools and to have the self-criticism to engage with them.
So, would you like to try this up? And then that's probably the last question, because I think we're really pushing.
If you want me to, sure. So I think there are basically a couple of layers going on, right? So you have, and the colleagues talked about this a little bit, basically the incentive structure that you're actually shaping as a voter. So if you're voting for a party or for a candidate that actually puts out a lot of inaccurate information, you're setting up a cycle that incentivizes them doing that next time too. It's just, as a member of any civic body, that is one of the responsibilities that can't be outsourced to industry or to civil society more broadly. That's on the individual as an active member of that community. On the industry infrastructure side, because I think these two things go in tandem, right, tooling up is the right thing to do. So I know, probably to be fair to the WELOPs at large, at least those that I talked to, we all started planning for 2024 and 2020, right? So when you get over one US presidential election, to be quite concrete about this, you start planning for the next, just because the economics of how you deal with these things require you to get there quite early. So there's a lot of runway involved. The other part of this, and this is my last point, I promise, is what AI changes, at least up to this point, is not the nature of the threat so much. At least I have yet to see any threat intelligence person on any large platform or in the broader threat intel industry that shows me a new type of threat that is enabled by AI. Might well be around the corner, but so far, at least, what's out there in the wild seems to be, known as terms of patterns. What is really changing is the economics of putting these kinds of attacks into play. It gets so much cheaper to do. You can do it at better scale, and you can do it more targeted, which is just another way of saying you can do things that used to be really expensive, now much more cheaply. And that is probably the most interesting game in town for 2024 in that particular area.
So in closing, I'd like to say thank you to the panelists, thank you to the audience, but to leave you with a thought, right? Because we're talking AI here as a tool, as perhaps a facilitator, but is it a scapegoat, right? Because at the end of the day, the culprit is us. We're using AI as a tool to do the bidding that we would like to do, right? So is there then perhaps just to think about is what is our role and what is the role of AI, and sort of take these two things out together so then we could really get to the root of the problem. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much, and have a good rest of your day.